I just got something rather fun in the mail, and there is also a big hole in the modular that needs to be filled. Let's see if this will help. So to my knowledge, the Moog Mavis is the cheapest set of Moog's oscillators and filters that you can find on the market. For less than £300, you get a genuine, complete, semi-modular Moog synth voice. As you saw from the intro, the Mavis is a DIY project, although it's hardly one. All you need is a screwdriver, it doesn't require any soldering, and it only takes a few minutes. And to many people, the Mavis might look like a downsized Mother 32. But it actually has quite a few differences from it, including me in the very first Moog with a Wavefolder. I actually sold my own Mother 32 to get Mavis, and Mother 32 was my very first semi-modular synth that I got as soon as it came out. Let's see if it was a good idea. I'm really looking forward to playing this thing. Before we do so, can I ask you the huge favor of subscribing to the channel and give me a like? Okay, let's start having a look at the panel. I also brought some friends so that we can have some fun with them. As we said, this is a classic monophonic Moog voice. It has one oscillator that can go from sawtooth all the way to a square wave. And for the square wave, you can modulate the pulse width. It has a classic ladder filter. You increase the resonance, you start losing some bass frequencies. Can get some bubbles. Sounds really good. And one thing that I like right away is that differently from the Mother 32, you get a full ADSR envelope, which is very nice. So you can really shape your sound. And the nice thing is that even without accessing the patch bay at all, you have access to some modulation over here, so you can decide the source of modulation. It can be either the envelope or the built-in LFO. So we have the envelope right now, and you can obviously modulate pitch, which comes handy to make a percussion sounds, or you can modulate the pulse width amount. The attack up a little bit. Obviously, you can modulate the filter cutoff. Or let's try with the LFO. And the LFO can get either a triangular or a square wave, and the triangular is very good to use as a second oscillator to use with the Wavefolder, but we'll get into it in a second. One thing that I didn't mention is that you also get a VCA mode, which essentially bypasses the envelope and it just keeps a sustained wave. Pretty cool. Here on the left you have some utilities that we'll see in a moment, and the Wavefolder, which by the way isn't hardwired in any way, so if you want to use it you need to patch it, and let's get into that. If you're not familiar with wavefolding, it's actually pretty easy to understand. It's simply a form of distortion. The distortion that we're used to hearing is clipping. Basically, when a waveform exceeds a certain threshold, the signal gets chopped off. With wavefolding, the peaks get inverted into a series of folds, and for this to work, the waveform that you feed the wavefolder needs to have a curved shape. So it will essentially work very well with sine waves, with triangular waves. With sawtooth waves works kind of okay, but it won't work, with square waves independently from the pulse width, because the square wave is already clipped. To use the Wavefolder, let's grab one of these beautiful green patch cables that come bundled with the Mavis, and let's go from the VCO out into the fold in, and then let's select a sawtooth and let's start folding. Should be pretty clear from the data here. Let's go down. However, even better, we said that triangular waves are better for wave folding, and that's one of the options in the internal LFO. So let's patch the LFO out into the fold in, and then we need to make sure that the LFO is at audible rate. So we'll bring the rate up to audio levels. This is our pure triangular wave, and we start folding it. Very nice. Now, the nice thing about the Mavis, just like the subharmonic and the DFAM, is that it comes with this very nice cheat sheet. So let's try some of these patches, shall we? I like that it's called Who Needs a Sequencer. Let's try and play with friends a little bit. So I have a very simple sequencer here from my Maleko Variegate 4+. Let's start it. Let's bring the Wavefolder in. It's quite fun. It's a real shame that the Wavefolder doesn't have a CV input, but we'll see how to fix that in just a minute. Before we do that, I sequenced a little something on the Variegate 4+, and I also added a little kick drum from the quad drum module that I have here. Nothing special, and I want to add a way to transpose these sequences. The Mavis doesn't have an internal sequencer. For this reason, I brought in this T43, which is a precision adder. All you need to know is that the T43 allows me to transpose an incoming sequence of CV by 2 octaves, 1 octave, 4, 2, or 1 semitones. So I have the CV output of the Maleko Variegate that comes into my 1 volt per octave input in the Mavis, and I'm going to move that to the sum output of the T43, and I'm going to come in the input A of the T43 with said sequence. And now this should allow me to do exactly that. Let's try. +1 semitone, or plus 2 semitones. Also 1 octave down. Now let's find a way to modulate this full knob over here via CV, even if it doesn't have a CV input. Something that should get us very close to the same results that we would have by CV modulating the full knob would be if we could find a way to control the level of the oscillator before the wavefolder, so that we can decide how much of that oscillator is going into the wavefolder and thus being folded. And we can do that bringing in an external VCA. To do that, let me interrupt this connection over here, and I'm gonna go out from my VCO with an external VCA, and then I can come out from that VCA back into the wavefolder. Let's fold it. So now this control is deciding how much of this oscillator is going into the wavefolder. And obviously I can modulate this via CV. For example, let's use our envelope to do this. Let's dial in something that we like. There you go. Here. I was controlling this. Yeah. Sounds really good. Really cool. Okay, I added a couple extra drums. Let's find out some modulation. I got my clap DS over here. Let's get the unipolar output into the filter cutoff of the Mavis. Let's use the bipolar route to CV modulate the snare. Or the hi-hats maybe. Fun. Really cool. Another thing that we didn't explore is the sample and hold circuit, which is really cool that has been included here. And one of the things that I liked the most about it, I was really missing it in the Mother 32, and I think is a great addition together with the Wavefolder. So in Mavis sample and hold, it's automatically triggered by the LFO. It's hardwired that way, but you can break it, bringing it another input. And the signal that is sampled is by default the oscillator, but obviously you can bring in a noise source or something. I don't have another one over here, but you can easily do that. So I'm gonna come out from the sample and hold here and get into the cutoff. And now my LFO rate is going to decide how many times this oscillator is gonna be sampled and which value is going to hit the cutoff of the filter. Let's get a square wave. Can get really crazy. And maybe actually this is another good way to demonstrate the attenuator. So if I come out from the sample and hold and get into the attenuator input, and then from the attenuator out into the cutoff, I can control how much of this is influencing the cutoff filter via the attenuator knob. Let's try and change from the cutoff to the pulse wave modulation. Really cool. Let's take the VCA out and let's bring it into my Timitsuara, which is a multi-effect unit. And this is actually stereo, so I'm gonna need a stereo input for my mixer. Let me grab that for a second. There you go. I have this little stereo splitter that comes with the Cockpit 2 by Endorphins, and let's grab two of Mavis little patch cables. Left goes to left and right goes to right. And now I was gonna go with something pretty like a reverb or something like that, but actually like the deconstruct algorithm that the Riot has. Let's try some of those. Oh yeah. Let's try something else. Distortion. How about we use the internal LFO of the Mavis to modulate the dry wet input of the timid Soara? I think that could be fun. So you grab the LFO out and you bring it here. Let's bring the sequence back up. Really fun. And maybe we can use the square wave to get a reverb in and out effect. Let's go into the reverb folder of the timid Soara. It's here somewhere. There you go. Let's try Cathedral. Now let's do this. I'm gonna select a very slow rate. Beautiful. Let's add some drums. While I hit the initialize button, so to speak, which essentially means getting rid of all the patch cables, one thing that I was thinking that I'd love to try is to wavefold the square wave. Obviously, you can't wavefold the square wave as such for the reasons that we just explained, but one thing that we can try is to bring the square wave into an external filter, which I have over here, and low pass the oscillator so that we essentially smooth out the edges of the square folder, and we should be able to wavefold the result of that. Let's try it. So to do this, I'm gonna grab the VCO out of the Mavis, bring it into the audio input of the WMD Carbon, which is my external filter, which hopefully you can see. Let's bring it more in. And then I'm gonna go from the 4-pole out, which is set to a low pass filter of the Carbon, into my fold in. So let's take the cutoff all the way up and the resonance all the way down. So when this one. Actually, you know what? Let's go into the Mordax data so that we can look at the results other than just listening to them. So this is my square out. It's a square. Gonna go with the pulse width all the way up. And now look what happens while I start bringing the frequency down, the cutoff frequency down. Bring some resonance up. So now I should be able to wavefold this. And I can. And it's quite fun. Let's compare it to all the filter all the way open. The Wavefolder doesn't do anything, and if I close the cutoff frequency, so that's quite cool. Nice. Okay, let's try and draw some conclusions. First of all, I really enjoyed playing with the Mavis, and I'm really happy I got it. I think it sounds absolutely phenomenal. It comes at an incredible price point, especially considering the Moog brand premium that it's attached to it. Even though the Mavis is a much simpler synth compared to Mother 32, I actually think they are quite different and not fully comparable. I think the Wavefolder is a very nice and refreshing addition to a classic Moog architecture, and I love the sample and hold circuit. It's very nice to have all these features packed into a very small form factor. If I had to list a couple of cons for the synth, I first of all think it would be very nice if the Wavefolder had a CV input. I know that there are ways to get around that, as we saw during patching, but I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity. Another negative is the lack of a noise source. That means that you can't really synthesize any sort of snare or hi-hat, and pretty much the only kind of percussion sound that you can get out of the Mavis is a kick drum, although a very good one. And the last thing is that, obviously, as we saw, Mavis doesn't have a sequencer. Now, that personally doesn't bother me too much either, because I really hated the sequencer of the Mother 32 and then never ended up using it. But that also means that if Mavis is your first synth, you also need to pair it with something like a Keystep or a Keystep Pro or something else to get the most out of it. Now let's try and answer the question who Mavis is for. I recently worked on a series of videos in collaboration with Film Scoring Tips, which targets the film composers that want to get into the fantastic world of modular synthesizers, which, by the way, you should really check out if you're interested. I'm going to include a link in the description. And I didn't really mention the Mother 32 as a good entry point into the world of modular synthesizers, simply because I personally believe it's a bit complicated. The sequencer is really not intuitive, and the patch bay isn't explained very well unless you're already used to working with modular synthesizers. Whereas the Mavis is very easy to use, especially if you pair it with an external sequencer like the Arturia Keystep, which is also very inexpensive. And it sounds just as good as the Mother 32, even if it has less features. And this was also the reason that led me to selling my own Mother 32 and getting the Mavis instead. It looked a way to get in a smaller form factor the features that I was using minus the ones that I wasn't using, plus the Wavefolder. In conclusion, I would say that Mavis is a great synth for beginners, with the caveat that you really want to get an external sequencer to go with it, but also for professional or more experienced synth users that want a real, truly analog Moog voice in a small form factor. And that's it. Let me close this with playing some more music. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Okay, I moved a couple of things around. I have like a very, very basic drum section with just a kick and a snare. One note, this 2 HP bell is actually a snare module in the case of a bell, so don't be fooled. This is my snare, but it's doing more of a hi-hat kind of thing. And then I simply have the Mavis inside the Timmy Zohara with a multi-filter delay. And that's it. So it's literally just the Mavis kick and snare that you're listening to. And I'll probably patch a few things around while playing. Let's try it.